Now, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Olayemi Cardoso, and Nigeria's Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edun, have pledged to continue to work together to scale up social spending, improve food security, and promote inclusive growth in Nigeria. Georgieva also reiterated her support for Nigeria's economic reforms. The IMF boss said all this at a closed-door meeting yesterday with Cardoso, Edun, deputy governors of the CBN, and some top officials of the Ministry of Finance. That's on the sidelines of the ongoing IMF World Bank meetings in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, the IMF has revised Nigeria's economic growth projections for 2025 and 2026 downwards, reflecting growing global uncertainties and sustained weaknesses in oil prices that continue to weigh heavily on Africa's largest economy. According to the April 2025 edition of the World Economic Outlook, released at the ongoing IMF World Bank spring meetings, Nigeria's growth was now expected to be at 3% in 2025 and 2.7% in 2026. That's down from its forecasts of 3.2% and 3% respectively, issued in January. Well, joining us on the show now to discuss Nigeria's growth projection is Esili Eigbe, Director at ESCAP Management. Good morning and welcome to the program today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Always great to have you here.
Fantastic.
The intro talks about the IMF and the IMF boss, what she has said about Nigeria. But there's also a third leg to it. The Article 4 visitation to Nigeria for 2025 was just completed. So all of these issues, if we can take them together. In the economic outlook, World Economic Outlook for 2025, generally, globally, IMF says 2.8% this year, 3% next year. Okay, maybe for Nigeria it's 3%. But if you read that along with the Article 4 consultation report on Nigeria, it's all about uncertainties. And they need to do something about the fiscal space, right? Well, the IMF boss, she spoke positively about Nigeria. But I think the overall message of all these reports is what countries need to do in the face of uncertainties, in the face of tariffs, in the face of lower oil prices. What do you think Nigeria still needs to do to address this uncertainty that the IMF is talking about majorly, even at the spring meetings?
Thank you, Dr. Abati. I believe that we've definitely tilted towards reforms, which are definitely in the right direction to go. But I think what we've been missing is the intensity in which we need to have implemented those reforms. So I think the government needs to be a bit more aggressive, and it speaks to a lot of the sort of the fiscal buffers that the IMF and the World Bank have been speaking to over the last couple of days that perhaps Nigeria has been lacking. And it's because we haven't really been intense with the reforms that we embarked on a couple of years ago. And I think that, clearly, as far as oil prices are concerned, because of the the implications of the volatility we've seen in the international market, that affects us significantly. We have a benchmark of close to about $75 a barrel. That's now down below $65, around $65. So that clearly has significant implications for our ability to generate revenue. We also have potential challenges with being able to borrow because we've seen quite a widening in credit spreads now, so obviously Nigeria's going to be borrowing more expensively. And we have very little, I'll say, policy buffers to sort of accommodate this. Very little forex reserves, and the currency has come under quite a lot of pressure. So I do think that it's a signal to the government to sort of buckle down and commit to much more aggressive reforms. And to speak specifically to what I expect them to do, we still need to talk about fiscal consolidation. We do need to cut costs. 55 trillion naira budget is inflationary, and there was a time we used to have the ECA, excess crude account, that essentially was to create a buffer to weather situations or crises like this. It seems like something now that probably tell your children. We once had the ECA, and that was an account that the federal government of the states could go to when we were in trouble like this. So I would say that is definitely one area that we could look at. The other area would be with respect to monetary policy. On the monetary policy side, I think that the central bank needs to stay hawkish. Their support and interventions in the forex market, I think, have been helpful. It'll be interesting to see how long we can sustain that, given just how limited the reserves are. But I think that they're doing relatively well. So staying hawkish is very important and not succumbing to pressure to cut interest rates. Inflation is still very real, and it's important that we try and manage that as tightly as we can. And so staying hawkish, I think, is very key to doing that. The government also needs to tackle corruption. Corruption is still a very big deal, in as much as I think this is something that would take perhaps a long term to address. The fight needs to start now. We need to commit to very concrete plans to managing corruption. I don't imagine that we can deal with it completely, but we need to obviously start that. And there's so many other things that I think need to be addressed to starting to build the necessary buffers that we need. The government fairly has, I think, demonstrated that it's got will, and perhaps they are, they're serious about this. Just maybe they're serious about the reforms, and to that extent, we've seen some interest in international investment. Starting to come around. This year alone, we've had 2 major international road trips, which were scarce for the prior 5 years. It was bone dry, so that they're starting to sort of consider Nigeria now as investable. I think it's encouraging and speaks to the work that we've done over the last year and a half.
Okay. All right. I want to focus on social spending, because I know you spoke about fiscal discipline and us cutting our costs. And IMF has also projected that in 2025, we're going to spend 4.5% more than our revenue. But we can't escape social spending, and it seems we're cutting spending that's hitting the poorest and the most vulnerable. There were also conversations around, so fuel subsidy is gone, fine. Electricity subsidy or energy subsidy is somewhat on its way out. And the IMF is putting more pressure and saying that energy subsidy is not efficient spend for social spending. But we already know how much power is debilitating not just the common man, manufacturers, at every section of society. The energy crisis in this country is hitting hard. So what do you say to comments from the IMF that one low-hanging fruit for us to be able to implement this fiscal discipline is to totally remove energy subsidy?
I mean, that's correct, and it speaks to my earlier point about fiscal consolidation. You can't keep spending money on subsidy. The truth about it is that if you even take away the fact that I guess the idea is you're trying to subsidize, low-income earning families. I think that it's a very disruptive intervention. I think that what you want are market-based prices that encourage investment in the sector. Not just for those that are currently, playing in the sector, but also, those that are outside Nigeria that are looking inwards at how they can obviously participate in the local energy sector. I think that there are other ways that the government can intervene if their focus is on low-income earning families. You can you can remove the subsidies to allow for, I would say, to allow for investment, but you can then, through perhaps transfers to families that you may have identified, then subsidize their electricity or even transportation.
Manufacturers are complaining as well. The presidential villa wants to install solar, so Band-Aid isn't working out for anybody.
Unfortunately, it's one of those things that you just have to deal with. It's kind of, if you take a look at petrol, for example, by taking off that subsidy on petrol, you freed the market. You've allowed people now to come back to investing, and there's a lot more structure to that marketplace now. And you can drive in, purchase your fuel, except for, times when, there've been maybe a few issues with respect to the Dangote refinery and the government. I think that we've had a pretty decent experience since September when they removed subsidies. So I expect the same as well in the power sector, If you'd remove subsidy, you incentivize investment, investors will come in, put money to work. By the way, we need a lot of money in the power sector, easily over $20 billion that needs to go into Nigeria to build up capacity to where we need, both in terms of generation, transmission, and distribution, okay? So we complain about not having 24 hours power. In fact, I was reading an article, I think last night, that was saying that, for even the Band A, consumers, they don't get up to 10 hours a day, which is, at very least disgraceful, okay? So if you do want to get to 24 hours of power, you need to open up the sector. The only way you open it up is you remove subsidies. Subsidies is it doesn't help.
What do you think about the outing of Nigeria's financial or central bank representatives at the spring meetings taking place in Washington, D.C. now? I know that they've hosted a series of different meetings, lots of different conversations. We saw the picture between Olayemi Cardoso, our central bank governor, and the leader of the IMF. As it stands now, are you satisfied with Nigeria's outing at these meetings?
To be honest, I haven't followed it very closely, but I suspect that the bulk of those conversations will be around building buffers to help sort of mitigate some of the challenges that we're having, loans, possibly even restructuring the existing loans, maybe very small, sort of interventions, sort of giving some of the withdrawal of aid that we've experienced quite recently. But I think that our problem really is more structural, and sort of seeking assistance around that will be very helpful. How do we move Nigeria away from its dependence on oil, for example? And I think that those are much more structural problems that require much medium, long-term solutions. And just going back to specifically your question, I think that hopefully they come back from those meetings with perhaps some relief, maybe promises on loans that they can use to weather this crisis. Hopefully it's short-lived, because I don't see how we can manage the situation if we did go into a crisis. It would be very difficult.
Okay, there was an issue we discussed this morning when Reuters was reporting from the spring meetings in Washington, which is about Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary of the U.S., saying that the IMF and the World Bank are both falling short of expectations, that they are focusing on irrelevant things rather than the issue of global macroeconomics. Do you agree with Scott Bessent, or you think it's just raising an alarm about the need for reform in the IMF or the World Bank? Are both institutions falling short of their original mandates?
Well, again, I think that is perhaps specific to Scott Bessent and maybe the current U.S. administration. Clearly, there's some political undertone to all of that. But to some extent, I do agree that some of those institutions do require some level of reform to make them a lot more impactful, And I believe quite recently, if not just last week, the IMF did introduce a new framework to its operations to help accommodate, its ESG goals, update its ESG goals, and make sure that, its work around particularly some emerging markets, including Nigeria, are a lot more impactful. So I do agree to that, and I think they're quite conscious of that, particularly in light of I think the posture of the current U.S. government, or the administration. But I'm trying to be very careful of the political undertone here. He's that I think he might have obviously brought to bear in speaking to those issues.
It's okay to agree with Donald Trump's administration sometimes. All right, thank you so much.
Reforms are not a bad thing, okay? So asking for reforms in very old institutions like that, okay, that were set up after the Second World War, is a good thing.
Even the United Nations itself needs reform.
Exactly.
We've been on that for decades.
Yeah.
I get your point.
Esili, Eigbe, it's always a pleasure to be in conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming to the morning show today.